Okay, it's almost time, but in the minute before, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping and highlight some things I think that are really cool. I'm an accessibility advocate, and I want to show y'all the reason I like Google Slides so much is sometimes not all of us have access to the information verbally, and in Google Slides, there's this button right here. If you select it, you can put on captions. I can select the text size, which I've chosen as large. I can put the text position, which I've put at the top, and I'll show why. And then I toggle them on, and now I have captions for folks. These are called open captions, though, because they're always on the screen. And the reason I put them on the top, because they're always on the screen. So when you put this into YouTube, if someone has captions on the bottom, it will cover those up. And because these are open captions, you can't go back and edit them. And I'll leave these on, but I am giving a demo, which isn't in Google Slides, so the captions will only be on during the slide time. There are some images in my deck, but most of them are decorative, so I'm not gonna describe them. There is a link to the slides. It's bit.ly/markdown-DCCO23. And the reason I give the link ahead of time is because we're going to do a couple of things, and you're welcome to follow along, but some of the things we're doing, there's links in the presentation, but I'll be reading them as well. And one last note, the views and opinions expressed by me here today are my own, and they're not connected with the Drupal community, and they're not connected with my employer. So if you want to follow along when I give the demo, this is a Markdown talk, so we'll be talking about Markdown, and one of the ways that makes it a little bit more straightforward to learn is when you're writing in Markdown to have an editor open and then have it be rendered on the other side so you can see what you're typing. So if you don't have an editor or you don't have one of choice, there's one online called try.discourse.org, and you can sign up for a free account and you can try out an editor there. My name is Amy June. I am the Certificate Community Architect for the Linux Foundation, but I'm also a Drupal core mentor. I do have my socials up there. It's usually Volkswagen Chick across all of the things. So why Markdown? I like Markdown. It's really cool. But one of the reasons what makes Markdown so spectacular is that when you use a plain text file, it doesn't allow formatting like headings or links or italics or underlining or code blocks. And Markdown does. They are different. They're kind of an in-between between a text file and a markup language like HTML, and they're human readable, unlike HTML. So why Markdown? I have this little tagline that says Markdown is the future of technical documentation. It's relatively simple, and I know simple is a relative term, so maybe we'll call it more straightforward. So Markdown is straightforward, it's intuitive, and it's portable. And I'll explain this as we go what those words mean, but it can be converted into HTML, a PDF, or any other formats using tools and platforms. And that's what makes it portable, is the language you can take from one place and put into another and have it mean the same thing. And think of using Markdown as like using an editor without the buttons. You have a plain box and you're writing things out that you don't have the use for those WYSIWYG buttons anymore. You can add your own syntax, you can add formatting, and Markdown can be used across projects, like I said, project to project. And sometimes it can be more accessible to folks because there's no extra keystrokes or having to use a mouse. It's all typing, like I said, it's an editor without the keys. So some people who don't use a mouse, or maybe they have to tab through to get to highlight something, if you have Markdown, your fingers never really need to leave those keys and you have keystrokes. And spoiler alert, Markdown is relevant now in Drupal because it is now in core with CK Editor 5. Very exciting stuff. Again, I want to go through like why Markdown, because I think it's important to express it in a couple of different ways. It works on any platform. It works on any operating system. There are dozens and dozens of Markdown editors, and all of them, well, a lot of them carry from Mac to Windows to Linux. It's a great tool for non-programming types or technical writers to write text without having to rely on HTML. And Markdown editors will make it easy to write your content and allow you to see what's on the other side. You know, you can have it render and you can see what's going on. For me, why I like Markdown is it controls my editorial formatting. When I submit an article or I submit documentation, I control the formatting. And the reason why I got into Markdown, I'm going to go into a little story, is recently I worked for Red Hat on the opensource.com team, and I was a managing editor, and people would give me their articles in Google Docs, and I would have to take that Google Doc, strip it of formatting, enter it into the Drupal instance, but then have to format it again. Drove me bananas. So it's like, just give me your stuff in Markdown. It's, you know, pretty straightforward, and it's true. If people gave me a Markdown file, I could just copy and paste it and put it in whatever. And then for me, asking people to do that, I realized the power of it from my own articles, how I didn't have to go back and do as much editing that the editor put in this extra formatting for me. Or maybe the editor didn't understand why I did something because of accessibility. So it gave me a little bit more control of my editorial experience. So the basic parts, like how do you get started? You start with an MD file. MD stands for Markdown instead of a TXT file. Like I said before, they're kind of a text file, between a text file and a markup language like HTML. I like to tell people to know your flavor of Markdown, because Markdown has lots of different opinions out there. So as you get to know Markdown, you'll recognize the flavors. And I like to tell people it's like dialects. You know, people can tell I'm from California. Well, people can tell it's a GitLab Markdown style, you know, so just get to know what editors you're using, where you're rendering it, and if your flavor of Markdown is appropriate for those spaces. You know, kind of do a little bit of homework. And then find a good editor. Everyone has a different opinion about what makes a good editor, because Markdown syntax is designed to be unobtrusive and readable. So the text in Markdown files can be read even if it isn't rendered. So find a good editor that makes sense to you. And these are some open source Markdown editors. I don't have an opinion about any of them. I do use VS Codium. It's the open source version of VS Code. For those that don't know, VS Code is not open source because it does some tracking. But Joplin's really good, Dillinger's good, and it just kind of depends on what your needs are. And then there's some other not so cool Markdown editors, and why I call them not so cool is because they're closed source. Obsidian is cool, except it's not open source. It gives this like, it dynamically links your files together, and you can like tag things, and it's really an amazing product, but again, it's not open source. And so after I close off the slides, we're going to talk about some of the basics, and I don't need to read what we're going to render, but these are some of the things that we're going to talk about. You know, a lot of inline formatting, some code blocks, tables, tasks lists, and then I have a couple of GitLab specific Markdown goodies that I want to share, but more and more people and more editors are adopting GitLab style than they were before, because now that GitHub, you know, is closing some of its software down, or, you know, making it closed software, more and more people are adopting that GitLab style. But before we move into the demo, if any of you have ever seen any of my talks before, I do like to have a PSA, and my PSA at DrupalCamp Colorado is to remind folks, in light of a prominent community sponsor's decision to host the web presence of hate groups, I want folks to remember to be sure your platform's accessible use policy prohibits the platform from hosting organizations designated as hate groups when adequate evidence is there that the designation of the hate group. If you want to know more about this, feel free to contact me on social media, but Clayton and I are going to have a BOF in the contribution room at 4:15 if anyone wants to listen to a conversation, because hatred in any form is not okay. Oops, I didn't mean to do that, but that's a good time because the demo is starting. But actually, before we go to the demo, there we go. So I have a GitLab repository full of all of these files that I'm going to be demoing. It's gitlab.com/Volkswagen-in-minutes. If you just go to gitlab.com Volkswagen Chick, it's pretty straightforward how to get there. And with that, we'll look at, so this is my GitLab repository. Again, it's Markdown in minutes, and I just kind of want to show folks how it's set up. I have a license. This is free and easy and open source if anyone ever wants to use this. We have some files here. I tried to separate them out to make it easier. If you notice, all of them have the MD extension at the end for Markdown. So I wrote the README in the style of a Drupal project README. You can see that this is a rendered README. We have a title, we have a bulleted list, we have some links. So this is another good reason to learn Markdown is if you do documentation in Drupal, most of it is in Markdown. So I have these separated out. So the first one we're going to look at is I think I opened a couple of these when I was trying to do the file. Okay, so the first thing we'll look at is inline formatting examples. So like I said, this is all rendered out. We're going to talk about italics and bold first. So up here in GitLab, we have the rendered file, but then we can also switch over to the source code. So you can see here, I'm going to switch over again. I have a heading, and I have a subheading. I have italics. So the rule is add one asterisk or underscore before and after a word or phrase with no space between the word and character. So if we switch over and we look at it again, we added one asterisk before and after, or one underscore before and after with no space, and that gave us italic. So there's two different ways to do italic. We have bold. We add two asterisks and two underscores with no space between the asterisks, no space between the special characters and the word. So we have bold, and if we switch over to the code, you can see two asterisks and two underscores. If you do go in here, I think, let's see what happens. Oh, I'm going to go into the edit. So if I go in here and I edit, and maybe I put a space between the underscores and hit save. Now when we render it, that one is not bold anymore. So that's a common mistake that some people will make, is they'll put a space in between the underscore or the special character. So there's that. Strike through. You see here we have the word strike through with a line through it. So to do that, we add two tildes before and after the word with no space between the special character. So if we go back to the source code, you can see sort of that same pattern. Two tildes, no spaces. And the last one on the page I have are block quotes. Block quotes To create a block quote, you put I don't know if that's a greater than or a less than symbol, but one of those arrow characters, you put that in front of your paragraph. So you see we have this block quote that says, I love Drupal. We go and we look at the source code. I have that caret and I love Drupal. So pretty straightforward. The next section is headings. So headings are important. And just to remind folks, because I am an accessibility advocate, headings are not for style, they're for semantic structure, they're to organize your content. So learning how to use headings in Markdown is an important part of accessibility. There are two different ways to write headings depending on what style of Markdown you're using. We can see here, I have this list of heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4, heading 5. Headings are not for style. They can be styled differently, but again, we want to use that for the semantic markup. And then we also have the second style where we have heading 1 and heading 2. So if we switch over to the code, to create those headings is adding a hashtag at the beginning. So to create that heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4, heading 5 list, you just add the appropriate number of hashtags in front. And an important thing to note between this and the last one we looked at with the inline formatting, there is a space between the hashtag and the words. So we have heading 1 with 1 hashtag and heading 5 with 5 hashtags. And then alternatively, if you only have the use for 2 headings on your page, you can do it where you have heading 1 with equal signs across the characters evenly on the next line, and heading 2 with dashes. So we'll go back and we'll look at what that looks like. So again, we have that hashtag heading 1, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then those second ones with the equals or the hyphens, look, it gives us a horizontal line underneath them too. So it renders a little bit different, but you can only use 2 headings with that style. And the next one are horizontal rules. This one's pretty easy. It's 3 dashed lines. So again, let's look at the code. Here's my 3 dashed lines. And there's my horizontal rule. Okay. Links. Links are cool. You can do a few different things with links in Markdown. Looking at it rendered out, you don't see very much. Here's some link text, it's underlined and it's blue. Here's a link to DrupalCamp Asheville. There is a way to add a title to a link. So if I hover over DrupalCamp Asheville, you can see now that there's a title in there that says we're going to DrupalCamp Asheville's homepage, which is kind of nice for folks that they know where they're going, but you can do this in Markdown. And then you can also do a relative link within a space or a repository. So let's look at the code. So the link text is enclosed in brackets, and then the URL is in parentheses with no space in between. So you can see the first one says link text in brackets, and you have the link URL in parentheses. So you can see my example is brackets, DrupalCamp Asheville, no space, parentheses, DrupalCampAsheville.com. And remember when I hovered over the DrupalCamp Asheville, there was that title. So the next one is the same format. We have the brackets with our DrupalCamp Asheville. And in parentheses, we have the URL. And then with the space, we have our title in quotes. So it's the same, bracket, DrupalCamp Asheville, parentheses with DrupalCamp Asheville with a space inside the same parentheses, quotes, DrupalCamp Asheville's homepage. And we're going to look at this again just to kind of burn it into our brains. And then I said we had a relative link within a repository. So we have that same bracket format. And instead of having to type that whole URL, because this goes back to something in this repository, I just have that last blob. So again, if we look at it, we have our link text, which was the brackets. We have DrupalCamp Asheville, which is a real link with the brackets, DrupalCamp Asheville, and in parentheses, the URL. We added that title. So when we hover over it, we had the brackets, DrupalCamp Asheville, and in parentheses, DrupalCamp Asheville, and in the quotations, DrupalCamp Asheville homepage, end parentheses. And then here's that one that goes back to a link within that repository, right? We didn't do that whole URL. So if I open that link in a new page, I went back to that file page. So you can do a relative link within your Drupal site or wherever you are. Email addresses. You can turn an email address real quick. You can turn a URL into a link or an email address into a link when you enclose it in those angle brackets. So we'll look at that rendered. All I did was DrupalCamp Asheville in brackets, and then my email address in brackets. So if we look back at the rendered code, it automatically appears as a link. So that's kind of a quick way to do it, is enclose it in brackets. Okay, so the next thing is inline code formatting. A lot of my experience, again, comes from, being a managing editor on a major contribution website, and being a person in accessibility. We'll have folks do screenshots of code and submit the screenshot of the code. Well, the screenshot of code is not very accessible because people cannot copy and paste that. So we prefer for people to put that in an inline code block and have it be formatted, so when people are reading the article or reading your README, they know that that's a code block. Again, because if you just have a screenshot, it's not very accessible. You can't copy and paste it. Sure, you could put it in the alternative text, but that makes it a little bit more cumbersome to get to that code. So we have two different kinds of Markdown here. We have inline code, where it's all just in one line, and then we have a code block. So to do it inline, the first one is I love Drupal. We have one back tick in the front and one back tick at the end with no spaces in between. And then when we have that larger piece of code, or when a big code block, it's 3 ticks on one line, your code, and then 3 ticks on a new line. So if we look at that, we can see here's that inline code with I love Drupal with the one set of ticks. And then here, we have the code block. We have 3 ticks, a break, our code block, a break, and then 3 ticks. So there's a hard return to get that code block to render. So again, just to look at it, you can see, depending on what your templates and what your formatting does, you could have this highlighted in green, you can have this highlighted in red, that's really up to your theming layer. Same thing with this, but when you're just doing it in basic Markdown, you can see the difference between the 2 blocks. And people can see it visually, but also people use assistive technology. It's got that little bit of code that lets people know that they're reading a code block. The next one are flow diagrams. Look at these. These are kind of cool, and I don't know, I am not a developer, I'm not a front-end person, and I hate using tools. So people are like, oh, you can just use Figma, or you can just do this. And I'm like, do you know how long it's going to take me to write a flow diagram using one of those tools because of the learning curve? Well, I found out that you can do diagrams in GitLab, and they're pretty straightforward. So it's surrounded with those 3 ticks like we had in our code blocks. We'd name a type of code there. It's mermaid code. So we have a graph with table data and a colon, and then I have it mapped. I have A mapped to B, semicolon, A mapped to C, A mapped to D, C marked to D with semicolons at the end of each line. Okay, so let's look at that one again. You can see we have that map, A to B, B to D, A to C, C to D. Now, we can also do something like this because we have choices, and it's really easy to just change it up. So if we go and look at the code again, I selected A to B, A to D, B to D, D to C. So again, looking at it, I have unlimited possibilities of the code I can add, or the diagram I can have. I can have A go to F over here, and then F go to C. So I can do it in seconds versus having to open up a new kind of editor and having to figure it out and copy and paste and, highlight it and stuff like that. So I'm just going to do one real quick just to kind of, for science, right? So let's add another one. Oh, I have to hit edit. So I'm going to edit. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to do a line break. And I'm going to go, I love copy paste, so I'm going to copy paste to make my life easy. I'm going to go A to F. And then a semicolon. Then I'm going to go F back to, I don't know, back to D. Let's try D with a semicolon. So now I'm going to hit save. And when I go, oh, my A to F didn't work. Oh, A to F. Oh, I didn't say F to D. But do you see the possibilities there? I didn't map that right, but all of those things are possible, all the mapping.
If you were to have like an A to D, and then like B to D, what is it going to do? Like, is it going to cross the lines?
I don't know that.
Is it going to try to come around? What should it do?
I don't know that. So part of my problem is I used lower cases. So let's see if using uppercase changes the way it looks, because my F's didn't map correct, because my A mapped to F, but then my little f marked a little D because my A didn't go there. So let's fix that first.
And by the way, this is fascinating.
Oh, good. This is my favorite part of it. Well, I have another little one, a surprise too. So let's do this. And what did you want to do?
Well, let's say that again.
Okay.
Because my brain can't hold it long enough.
Sure.
Okay, so let's make an A to I don't know, G.
A to G.
And then do G to F.
Okay.
What I'm trying to see is what happens when it crosses A to G, B to F.
A to G. G to F. It's
Interesting. But what if we want that G
to be?
to be between A and D? That's so you do A and G.
G to D.
D, and then G to F.
Okay.
Probably earlier.
That's okay. So A to
A to D, E to G, and then G to F.
we have audience participation. So it might
it's trying very hard
to not cross.
lines.
Yeah.
That is super freaking cool. How does it do that? How does it do that?
Well, anyway, you can play around with it more at home. But this is what made me want to give the talk, was like knowing that I could do these flow charts. So the next one is lists. We all do a lot of lists. So we're going to look at rendered lists first. We have ordered lists, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or now this is rendered, so it's going to look the same, 1, 2, 3, 4. if we look at the code, there are two ways to do ordered lists. You can do number, period, with a space, first item, in sequential order, or you don't have to have them in sequential order. Look, all of these are just marked 1. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, or all ones look the same. They both look like an ordered list. So an unordered lists are our bullet points. And how we do those is we either add a dash, an asterisk, or a plus line in front of the line items with a space. So you can see here, there's 3 sets of bullets here, and they all look the same. But if we go and we look at the code, you can see that the first one I used a dash, the second one I used an asterisk, and the third one I used a plus sign. So again, 3 different ways, and we'll look at the rendered stuff again. 3 different ways create the same background. So when we combine the two, we're going to have a ordered list, and then we're going to have some some bullet points inside. So what does that look like? What that looks like is, you have your first list, you have your second list, and then what you do is for those bullet points, it's the same syntax with the plus, the minus, or the asterisk, but you don't tab, but use actual spaces, so it falls right underneath. So it's like a hanging indent sort of thing. So again, if we look at it rendered, you can see that it looks like like a what's that we use when we were in school to write an essay where you put everything out in bullet points? What's that called? I have no memory for what it's called right now. But you can see that it renders it pretty nice. With saying that, there's also task lists. So these task lists are kind of cool, and they use some of that syntax we just talked about, where we add bullets and then a set of brackets and a space in between it, and we get this checkbox. And to complete a task, you can see that some of these have check marks that are checked. You put an X in those, and to strike out something, you put a tilde. So let's look at this a little bit, kind of digest what it is, and then if we look at the rendered code, you can see that I have it as a bulleted list with my dash, with a space, and then my task is the brackets. The ones that are done have an X. I think this period is a typo, so don't pay attention to the period. But the tilde is a strike through. So if we look back again, and we have that, where we moved some stuff over, indented them. So you can see there's that checklist, which was just the X, and we struck through something. It didn't do anything with the box, but it struck out the item. And again, this one's a little bit more complicated, so just to show the code again. Oh, that wasn't a period. It is a piece of dirt on my computer that was right in the middle of the brackets. So no typo. Again, complete the task, strike the task, and an incomplete task is empty. Another cool thing are drop downs. So here I have a drop down, and my question is, what is the best DrupalCamp in the world? This is a subjective one, okay, but watch this. I have a drop down with 3 available answers: Asheville, Florida, or Colorado. I'm not going to pick, you can pick your own, but again, this is a neat little thing that you can do in Markdown. So if I go into the code, you can see I have details. I have the summary, which is the question. This is regular HTML here. Summary, and then I have my answers, which are with A1:, and I have Asheville with a break, A2:, Florida with a break, and the last one doesn't have a break. So again, the drop down is the summary. So if we go back here, we have a drop down, and we just push the button, and there's those answers that we programmed in. Pretty neat. Yes. Oh, I can't hear.
Box.
Yeah.
task list inside the dropdown?
Can you do what?
A task list inside the dropdown.
Yes. Can you put a task list in a dropdown? Yes, you can. All of these are completely mixable, which is the nice part about Markdown. There's a little bit of a learning curve with the order of it, but it's pretty straightforward. You make one mistake, you go back and you either like forgot a space in between or you put a space between the special characters. But yeah, you can do combinations of them. Because this is only a 45-minute presentation, the last thing I want to share are tables. Okay, tables you can write in Markdown, and tables are accessible. But I want to note there's one table I made here that is not accessible, and I'll tell you why when I do it. Okay, so here we have different tables. The first table, you can see that all of my items are left aligned. You can see all of them, aligned to the left of the table. My second table is all right aligned. They're all aligned to the right. My third table is center aligned, where all of the information in the data table is in the middle. And then we have a mix of all of them. So let's look at the code and see what makes it right aligned and what makes it left behind. So first, to make a table, you have the pipe symbol. So on the top, you're defining your labels. We have a pipe with a space in between tables, and we have another pipe that are, and then another pipe left aligned. And then underneath it, we're defining where we're justifying the text. So you can see I have the pipe with a colon and all those dashes. It's on the left side in all three of those columns. So if we go back and we look at it, all of those are left aligned. We go back and we look at our right aligned one, that second row, all of our colons are on the right end. So again, left aligned, your colons on this side, right aligned, your colons on the other side. If you want to have your table centered, your text in the middle, you just put the colon on both sides. So we're going to look at those again. So again, this one was the colon on the left side, this one was the colon on the right side, and this was the colon on both sides for justification. And there's one more, which is kind of a mix of all of them, because you can do that. So the first one I have left aligned, the second one I have middle aligned, and the last one I have right aligned. And I should really take out that last one, but we'll talk about it. So you can see, this one's left aligned, this one's right aligned, so you can do the combination of both. You also don't have to have them aligned. It defaults to center justification. You can also have a row that's blank, but that's not very accessible because your assistive technology will skip that cell and people will get lost on where they are. So I should really take this out, but maybe it's a good precautionary tale is when you're using Markdown for table, you don't typically want to have an empty cell because the assistive technology gets confused. So again, to Anna's question about mixing stuff, I like to do this task list because it shows that you can do a bunch of different things all at once, just play around with it, have fun. And I want to go back to the README a little bit because I have an example of a Drupal README in here. This is from the Gin admin theme. You can see that if it's in Markdown in your code base, this is still human readable, which is nice. I see that there's a little mistake here that they made, but that's okay. You're supposed to have a line break between headings and the paragraph space above it. But you can read it like someone who's not technical. This isn't an HTML. There's not a whole lot of things going on. So I can give this to my project manager. I can create a file where I can be as specific as how I want it formatted. If it's rendered in Markdown, if you're in a Markdown editor, there's some visual cues with colors and things like that. Here's the bullet list. Here's our code blocks. So if we look back at it, Markdown is pretty relevant. We do encourage Markdown in our code bases for our READMEs, and we do encourage it in our, when you're submitting stuff to like editorial magazines. But see, you've got your bold, you've got your links, you have your headings, you have your, they use the horizontal line themed, but pretty straightforward stuff. There's a lot more that you can do with Markdown. There's more advanced commands, of course, but this was a session just to kind of get us started a little bit. And with that, Mike Anello, he's a good friend of mine and my mentor. He has recently wrote a Markdown module. It's brand new. It's Markdown _easy, Markdown easy. And it's brand new, and he would love people to test it out. So if you want to learn a little bit more, if you want to look at his code, and just kind of help him get that Markdown module in the contributed space, because there was a really good Markdown module in the Drupal 8 space, but there's a lot of code in it, and the maintainer is absent now. And so Mike really wanted to have a little bit more straightforward Markdown module. And then in my list, I have some resources. I pulled from a couple of different flavors. I used Common Mark, I used GitLab flavored Markdown, and I used GitHub flavored Markdown. And more, our editors are smart enough to know what flavor you're using, and it might be new for a couple of months, so only the GitLab flavored stuff will render in some, but it just takes a couple of feature requests, and the other editors catch up. So thank you. Are there any easy questions? And you can see that Google Slides does not render Markdown. You can have it render Markdown. There's an extension that you can use to do that. So any questions from online, Matthew? No? Okay. Well, thank you. And I just want to leave it on this one because it's so cool.